So, if you're watching this, it means that you're probably like me. You enjoy reading, but you're maybe a little bit disappointed or discouraged with the amount of reading or lack thereof that you're doing. So, you want to figure out how to read more. And, well, the thumbnail gives it away. It's super simple and bad news. There is no just like cheat sheet kind of like do this one thing and you'll be reading like 10 more books every, I don't know, couple weeks or whatever, however many books you're trying to read, right? There's no like just magical way to have this happen. It's very simple. You just have to choose to read more, which is really frustrating kind of because it's a really, really easy thing to say. It's a less easy thing to do. But I do have a couple of tips, a couple of pointers, I guess, some advice, some things that I would say to consider when you are trying to start reading more, when you're trying to get more books done in your backlog, or there's some that are coming out that you want to get to, or if you just want to read more in general, whatever your goal with reading is, and clearly you have one and you would like to read a little bit more, that's why you're watching this video. I do have some tips besides just you have to make the choice to do it. But that's tip number one. You just have to make the choice to read more. It's so easy now. There are so many things that you could be doing besides reading. You could spend time doom scrolling on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, TikTok, whatever platform you choose, right? You could spend your time doom scrolling. You could spend time on YouTube. You can spend time binging whatever TV show on Hulu or Disney or HBO or whatever thing, right? You could spend time playing video games. There are always so many options to do besides reading that most of the time are going to be easier to do than reading. Like it takes effort. Even, I don't know, I guess it's not the same for everyone, but I was going to say, even for me, someone who absolutely loves reading, it's more effort for me to sit down and read a book than it is to just scroll on Twitter or to put on a YouTube video, right? And so the first step is you just really have to try to habituate yourself into making that decision to no, instead of watching an episode of a TV series, I'm going to sit down and read for 20, 30, 40 minutes, whatever. And that's the first step. The cool thing about this is that the more that you do that, the easier it will become to continue doing that, right? Because then you're like, oh, I've gotten in the habit of reading a little bit at a time or more often than watching this episode of TV show. And now I've gotten to this part in this book where it's super enthralling. I need to see what happens next, right? I got to keep reading it. Or if it's an educational book, I read a lot of nonfiction as well. So it's like, oh, I just want to learn more about whatever the topic thing is that I'm reading, right? And so the more that you get in the habit of reading more, the easier it will be to continue reading more. But it really is at that first point about making that decision to no, instead of doing this other possible easier thing, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to read some. And my next 2 points kind of go hand in hand. And one of them is keep books super close to you. This wasn't even put here specifically for this video. I have this book, which is God Emperor of Doom. Fantastic. Love this series. And then I also have this bigger book, which is my nonfiction book that I'm reading right now, which is The Designer's Dictionary of Color, right? So I'm reading this, obviously, for study purposes, and then this is my little fun one that I'm reading right now. I also have, like, 5 other books that I'm in the middle of that I'm just not technically, like, currently reading or making progress in. Like, I'm, like, 100 pages into The Two Towers, but I haven't touched that in a little bit. So the tip here is to keep the book close. Keep whatever you're reading or trying to read in close proximity to you, because that will make it easier for you to then do step one in making the choice to read, because it's right there. It's like, oh, I can just grab this and start reading this and I can read a couple pages to it. And so it's like keeping it at your desk, or if you're hanging out in a different room, bring it with you to that room. Even if you don't necessarily think that you're going to be reading it in that amount of time, it's better to have the option than not, because then you do have the choice to read a couple pages. And this kind of goes into point 3, which is it's okay to read just a page or 2 or 5 or whatever at a time. Like, that's fine. You don't have to read 8 chapters of a book or 200 pages or finish the book in a setting or whatever. Like, you can it's fine to just read a little bit of a time. That's still progress. That's still getting you towards your goal of reading more. That's 2 more pages than you would have read had you not decided to sit there and read those 2 pages. And alongside with the first thing that I brought up, when you do that, you get more in the habit of, oh, okay, I'll read a couple pages here and I'll read a couple pages there. And then that starts just snowball and spiral and become more progress. And then you get more acclimated to reading more. And so maybe you're like, oh, okay, well, I'll sit down and read like 20 pages or for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever, your metric might be. It just starts to increase. The frequency increases and the volume will increase the more that you kind of habituate yourself to do that. So keep the book close. And it's fine if you just read a little bit at a time. You're not going to sit down and read 150 pages every time you sit down to read. That's fine. That's not the goal here. The goal is to just read more in general. And so keeping the book close will do. Like I will bring my book with me everywhere basically. And like 9 times out of 10, I'm not going to be reading out of it when I bring it with me. But the 1 time out of 10 is still 1 more time than had I not brought it with me, if that makes sense. So keep the books close, keep it in proximity. That way you have that option to do that instead of the other things like scrolling on your phone or watching something or whatever it might be, right? So keep it close. Be okay with just reading a little bit at a time. And then going hand in hand with that is don't get discouraged because you're not reading as much as you would like to. Because I feel like, for me at least, this is something that happens a lot where I will not be making the progress that I want to. And so then I just won't read at all because I'm not hitting this ridiculous goal that I've set for myself. Like this year, I would like to have read 52 books by the end of the year. I am nowhere close to keeping pace with that right now, which is fine. I'm trying to not let myself to get discouraged by that. I'm trying to actively practice the things that I'm preaching in this video, which I admittedly do need to be better about, right? And so that's the other thing. That's where it all circles back to like point 1. Like you can have all of these tips and you can know all of these things where it's like, oh, I need to do this and this and this, and that'll help me read more. At the end of the day, you still have to decide to read more, and that's the number 1 thing that like I need to work on personally. But don't get discouraged about not making the progress that you want to make and let that deter you from reading at all, because that's something that will happen. That's what's happened to me a lot of the time is I'm like, oh, well, I'm 10 books behind on however many I want to read. Like I didn't hit my goal. I might as well just not at this point. And that's not the right mindset to have. It's fine to just read, like I was saying, a couple pages at a time, because that's still just more reading than you were doing in general. So yeah, I think those are the big things. I mean, there's a ton, I'm sure, of like little tips. One thing that I've seen, and I kind of practiced for a little bit, was I would do a version of active reading. So active reading, the way that I've seen it described and thrown around is like a lot of people will read a book and then also listen to the audiobook while they're reading along, and that will help them focus and like get through it, which I think is awesome. I actually haven't tried that myself yet. I think that would be really cool, and I also love audiobooks, which for the record also count as reading. If you're an audio person, I highly recommend audiobooks. They're fantastic. They're not for everyone, so that's fine if you don't like them, but I am very much in the crowd of like reading an audiobook is still reading the book. So that's great. If you can do that, do that. The reason I haven't practiced active listening in that regard, where I'm reading the book and listening to the book, is because then you have to buy the book twice or have the book twice. Like you have to have the physical book and the audiobook for it. And most of the audiobooks that I listen to are books that I don't have physically. So there's that. But that might be one thing that you might be interested in if, that is something that sounds cool to you. The other form of active listening or active reading that I have found is to be taking notes while reading. So this is something that I did for a little bit. I've kind of fallen off on it recently, but whenever I was doing it, I did find it very helpful in that I was very engaged. And when I say taking notes, this doesn't have to be literally like writing things down in the book. You can take some notes while you're doing that, but for me, it was mostly just like underlining key points. So I'm a big note person. I have another video about note-taking stuff that I'll make at some point. So I was just underlining things in the book, either lines that were intriguing to me, interesting, things I wanted to remember, just good writing that is inspiring to me, whatever the thing might be. I was just underlining it. That way, whenever I finished the book, I could go through and put those whatever things I annotated into my notes and do that. And so that was cool because then I was much more engaged in the reading. this will work for some people, it won't for others. Some people, I know, it would probably like disrupt the flow of reading. Like, you just want to be in the book and reading it and not stopping and like going back and rereading and all of that while you're going through it the first time, which totally makes sense. But that's just one thing that helped me a little bit at some point. Another thing that I love doing is listening to music. So I can't listen to anything with lyrics while I'm reading because the words then start to jumble and it doesn't compute in my brain. So I will listen to film, video game, and television scores a lot of the time. But then I also have found this app. It's Brain.fm, who is not a channel sponsor, but if anyone from there is watching and would like to be a channel sponsor, that'd be sick. It's an incredible app, though. Can't recommend it enough. They have like it's instrumental music that is there's science behind it and stuff, and they have different like activities that you can select that go hand in hand if you're like studying or reading or whatever it is. And Brain.fm has also been incredible for me for my focus and like getting into the zone for reading. So like just general music, Brain.fm is fantastic. Can't recommend it enough. And yeah, so those are just another couple things to like help get you focused and in the zone for reading. If you're going to be trying to do it for like an extended period of time, it's less convenient to be doing that if you are just going to be reading for like 5 pages really quickly. Like, I'm not going to sit and pull up Spotify or Brain FM if I'm reading like 2 pages, right? Like, I'm just going to sit there and read the 2 pages really quickly. But if I'm going to sit down and I want to read for like 30 minutes or an hour or however long, I will do that to then help me kind of focus and get in the zone. So yeah. I think those are basically all of my major tips for trying to read more. Like I said at the beginning, it all comes down to the first one. You just have to make the decision to do it because bottom line, if you have the time to get through 4 seasons of Justified on Hulu, this is a self call out. I've done that in the last couple of weeks. If you have the time to do that, you have the time to read a couple chapters in a book, right? If you have the time to play video games for 5 hours, you have the time to read for 5 hours, right? It's about making that choice and weighing those options. So like that's the number one thing is you just have to buckle down, make the decision to do it. But then besides that, yeah, I would say just keeping it close at hand, being okay with reading just a little bit at a time, not getting discouraged by not making a ton of progress, and finding ways to help get yourself in the zone and focused and not distracted when you're trying to read. Keeping the phone away is also like a super crucial, very important thing. Don't check it for however long you're trying to read because that will automatically stop you. Just full stop. I feel like that one should probably go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyways. Keep the phone away. But yeah, those are my little tips, some advice if you're trying to read more. These are things that I found have helped me a little bit. I'm not perfect at it. Like I said, I'm way behind on my reading goal, but I know that these things do help me whenever I practice them. So just wanted to offer that up, and hopefully you found some help in here. Hopefully you're able to read a little bit more and get closer to your reading goal for this year or just in general. That'd be awesome. But I think that is it for me in this one. I will see you in the next one. Be nice, be kind, and thank you for watching.